I have a cousin named Lloyd and his wife Kathy. Kathy told me that her and her husband's friend that lives near da- lives down a dirt road from them in Quincy, Gadsden County, Florida. Their friend said that every time he is swimming at night in his pool, he keeps seeing two yellow eyes looking at him at the back of his property line in the woods, and it's been going on for months. Well, Lloyd and his friend that lives down the dirt road made a decision to walk down the dirt road together with a flashlight, seeing if they can spot something in the woods. Not a long walk later, it was walking with them. They stopped to look with the light, but did not see anything, so they began to walk again. After several feet, it started to walk with them, and they could hear it in the woods. They stopped, and he took the spotlight to see if he could see it, but this time he seen two yellow eyes in the bushes, right next to them. He was knocked down, and they seen something tall coming at them, and then it ran across the road. After knocking Lloyd down, they turned back to see him, but they both took off running. They said it was on 2 feet, and it had hands that pushed Lloyd down. They know it was a sasquatch because of really bad odor, and it was able to see it enough to know by its height and being on 2 feet and pushing with its hands, there is nothing else that it could have been than Bigfoot. I decided to drive to see a location in a national forest where I grew up camping, so when I got there, I parked and decided to walk to a creek where I used to swim and fish when I was a kid. My location was approximately 6 miles away from housing. When I got close to the creek, I seen catfish laying on the ground with their necks slashed. A couple was bit down just above the tail and didn't have a bad smell, so probably fresh. A friend told me a black bear did it, but the embankment above the creek is about 6 feet, and our black bears in North Florida are not big enough to reach down, and will have a hard time getting back out. After that, I decided to walk away back to my car, but I heard a big bang, like a big branch or pipe hitting a tree, but did not hear anything hit the ground. So that's when I left. The same location when I was a kid fishing at night, I heard something behind me, so I looked, and something was shaking a big bush pretty hard, and that was enough to scare me. So I looked in a horror movie. I dropped my flashlight and went out. I quickly thought about jumping into the creek, but I had an image of an alligator in my mind. It stopped while I was picking up the flashlight and got it to come on, and I heard something coming up from my left, and I shined the light and seen my brother walking up about 20 feet away from me. It was most likely stopped because I seen another person coming. It's probably the same one that killed the fish and banged against the trees. I got a close friend that was standing about 20 feet away from one, and it was screaming at him and his wife in broad daylight. And the same friend witnessed Sasquatches 2 other different times. I have other friends that have seen them too. About 6 or 7 years ago, I was fishing in the upstate New York Adirondacks. I was fishing a small tributary about 2 miles from the parking lot in a swampy area where few made the effort to travel. Add in the recent tornado to the area, causing countless tree blowdowns and it making traversing the terrain very difficult. However, the fishing was exceptional, and it had it all to myself. After a short period of time, I had the feeling of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, but the only thing there was the big black roots and soil from a blown down about 75 yards behind me. I went back to chasing my line, but vividly remember thinking to myself how false sightings of Bigfoots can easily occur because at first glance, through the downed trees, this dark blowdown resembled what is often described as Bigfoot, down on one knee watching me. I chuckled to myself and kept on fishing. A short while later, as I began to pack my gear for the hike out, I looked down the area of the big, dark, rooted, blown down tree, and there was no longer a blowdown there. That's my story. Not really exciting, but true, and let's say I made quick time of the 2-mile hike out with my head on a swivel. I recently had a sighting near the Alaska Triangle. It was 10 p.m. at night. I was camping, and I suddenly heard knocking sounds from a distance. I went there to check it out, and I saw what looked like a hairy man about 8 feet tall, muscular, and grumpy when it saw me. It turned around and disappeared into the forest. I've moved to the country, and we live in a hunting land behind our house. Now I have 2 Class B sightings. First, I was going through something, screaming when I heard heavy footsteps coming closer and closer to me. The tree limbs in the ground breaking. The second was just tonight. I heard a whoop and had a rock thrown at me, but it's a warning to me. I think it's a warning that the rock was thrown at me. Here's another experience I posted on another site here a while back. It was really cool. It involved Junior again, and Archie is in the experience as well. Hope y'all enjoy. If you don't know who Junior and Archie is, I please revert back to my first post on this site. Thank y'all. We call our family by name. Y'all be good. Talk to you next time. So anyway, we get down at the gifting spot one day. This is about 2 weeks after the knockathon. We call this one the piggyback. So me and my wife are just sitting there cutting up and being ourselves as usual. All of a sudden, I hear some rustling in the leaves from the left, so I look over that way. I don't see anything at first. Then I looked a little more focused and I see what looks like Junior. And I said, "Baby, would you look over to the left and see what you tell me that you see over there?" She goes, "Where?" I said, "Between those 2 trees over there. Look." Of course, she's as sarcastic as I am, and she goes, "There's 1,000 trees over there. Which trees?" Anyway, I narrowed it down, and she sees what I'm looking at, but Junior hasn't moved yet, though. Finally, after about a minute or 2, he bends down. Looks like he's looking for something on the ground. I said, "Baby, what the heck do you think he's looking for?" She says, "Heck, I don't know," and I said, "I don't either." But as he was bent down, he looked backwards straight behind him. Still don't know what he's doing at the time. Then all of a sudden, we seen 2 little hands come up over Junior's shoulders. Then he stood straight back up again. After he stood up again, he looked around a few times, and then we saw his face come up over his shoulder. And it was Archie. I don't know if he was just babysitting or just having fun with him or both. Anyway, Archie put his face right over Junior's shoulder, so we could see both faces at the same time. It was really cool. This was one of the most cool mutual sightings between the both of us. After that, he just piggybacked him off out into the deeper woods, and we lost track. Me and Archie has this special relationship that I'll probably never get to talk to you about. But it's really cool. I also believe that Archie will be just like Junior when he grows up. He seems to have the same attitude as Junior does. I'll tell you, I don't need another Junior. I wouldn't trade any of them for nobody, though.
I had a vivid memory of seeing a demon-like figure above my bed when I was a small child. I vaguely remember it smiling at me. I also remember hiding in the closet from something. There was another time when I was in high school, age 16 or 17, and I was staying at my dad's house. He was out of town, and my sister and I shared a room at the time. I was sound asleep, and I remember a feeling someone getting in bed with me. It wasn't uncommon for my younger sister to do this if she was scared for whatever reason, so I moved over a little so she could get in. I was laying on my side with my back to her. I laid there for probably 10 seconds or so before a sudden realization came to me. My sister was at my mom's house, and I was in the house alone. I was frozen for a moment, but then sprang out of bed and ran straight downstairs, grabbed my keys, and got in the car. I immediately left and called my mom, who was just a few miles away. I told her what had happened, and I was going to come stay with her for the evening. About 3 years ago, I was watching my 2 little brothers, twins, when a black mist or fog started to creep up the stars. It was very subtle at first, then it became more opaque, and weird humming and whispering started happening, and a feeling of dread and death loomed over me. I thought I was just tired and was imagining things, but then my little brother started to cry and feel scared. At the same time, my 4 dogs were going insane, barking and growling at the weird mist thing. It only ended when my entire family walked through the door coming home from the store. It did not go away imminently. It was around 30 seconds before it dissipated. I don't believe in the paranormal, and this day I still can't explain it. In the middle of the night, I went to the washroom and my cat wandered into the bathroom with me. I started petting him, and when I looked up about 20 feet out, there was also my cat. I looked back down to see, and he was gone. I looked up to see where he was apparently teleported, and he was gone from there too. Still to this day, I have no idea what actually happened, but I'm convinced my old cat could teleport. I had just let him outside, and he was random wandering in the house, aimlessly. A guy was at a friend's house drinking. He left at 10 p.m. to go home because he had work in the morning. He walked 2 blocks to his house and saw his brother heading out. He asked his bro why he was going on so late on a school night. He said, it's 7:30 in the morning, I have class. To this day, he doesn't know why it took him almost 10 hours to walk 2 blocks. Apparently, it was actually between the hours of 10:30 and 5:30. I was working late at night by myself in a small machine shop. Yes, I know, OSHA, whatever. The machine was running, and I was at the computer next to it working on a program when I felt as if someone was standing right behind me. I turned around and experienced the most bizarre and terrifying feeling that I cannot fully explain. It felt like I turned around right up against a solid stone wall. The noise from the machine was muffled. My own breath bounced off something and back to me when I blew out, and my eyes were trying to focus on something right in front of me for a split second. Then nothing. The noise came back, and I was just staring at 50 feet of empty shop floor, like something was just there. I'm a grown man. I'm not afraid to say that I screamed. I felt terror like I've never felt in my entire life. The closest thing I could think of is if you turned around and you were face to face with an effing bear and it just walked away. I used to be a manager at a retail store, and we had a few weird things happen there. One day, I found a bunch of broken glass shelves that all the employees said they knew nothing about. I checked the camera footage and there was no one in the room. Lights were off. All of a sudden, the motion sensor lights came on, and it was a few seconds later, all the glass broke. Once, I had to work overnight with 2 other employees. There was music playing over the speakers, but at some point in the night, the music just stopped, and all of us heard a baby crying over the speakers. I told another one of our managers about the crying baby, but he didn't believe it. He said there's always some explanation for things like that. Until one night, he was there late at night and heard the same thing. Said he locked up and ran right out of the store. My former apartment had something paranormal in it. One day, I kept having the urge to look over my shoulder every time I walked from my bedroom to the den. I had the most incredible, unnerving feeling that someone was behind me. I ignored that feeling, and a few days later, when my 4-year-old daughter came back, I was watching a football game that Saturday, and my little one came out of her bedroom and was walking down the hall. She kept glancing over her shoulder until she broke out in a run. She jumped up on the couch and kept looking down the hall towards the bedrooms. After a few seconds, she asked, "Daddy, is someone here to visit us?" I told her no and changed the subject. Several days after, I started seeing something move at the end of my hallway in my peripheral. A few things happened that still make my eyes water. We were both happy when we moved. One of the last incidents was roughly a month before we moved. My daughter had just eaten breakfast and was playing in her room. She came out crying and telling me she saw an old man with scary eyes in the corner. She was inconsolable for a few minutes. I grabbed my sidearm and cleared the apartment just to be sure it wasn't an intruder, but of course nothing was there. She never went in that room again. We both slept at my dad's most of the last month until I bought my house. No unnerving presence there. It was late at night, December, full moon. Snow covered the ground and the moonlight reflected off the snow, and it felt like daylight outside. I walked to my garage to grab a soda. I seen my neighbor was feeding his chickens. He seen me and waved, so I walked over and asked him, "Why are you feeding so late?" He said, "Passed out in my chair. Also, would you mind doing me a favor?" I said, "Sure." He said, "I have a tool of your dad's I was using, and I need to return it. It's inside. I'll be right back." I stood there for a second and came back and handed me a Dremel tool. A few more short words, we said goodnight and parted ways. I set the Dremel on the kitchen counter and go lay in my room. In the morning, my dad came into my room and said, "Hey, Monk, what did I say about soda in your room?" I woke up and said, "Sorry, I was getting out of bed." He said, "Hey, did you set that Dremel on the counter?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Where'd you get it?" I said, "John." He said, "When?" I said, "Last night." He said, "Impossible. John is in Texas for his daughter's Air Force graduation." I said, "I saw him last night feeding his chickens." He said, "I'm taking care of his animals. He's not going to be back home till Wednesday, 4 days later." "Did you break into his house and steal it?" he asked. I said, "No way. I didn't even know he was borrowing a tool." So he walked me over to his house. He wasn't home. The house was locked. We even called John, and he said he was in Texas. I still don't have an explanation for what happened. A couple years from now, my mother was working from home. It was 9 p.m.-ish, and I went downstairs to get a drink. I saw my mom working in her open office and said to her, "Almost done?" She said, "Yeah." I finished my drink and went back upstairs. My parents' room is at the top of the stairs to the right. As soon as I reached the top step, the door opened and my mom stepped out. It scared the crap out of me. I ran back downstairs and my mother was not there. I walked back up the stairs and she was rightfully very confused. I asked, "When did you get upstairs?" She responded that she's been upstairs since 7. I really don't have an explanation for that one. A buddy of mine is a Marine, and he was doing an exercise deep in the woods with his unit one day. He eventually got lost. After walking around for about an hour trying to figure out where he was, he came across 3 guys and asked them for directions. They pointed him back in the direction of his camp, and he was able to get back. Shortly after he got back with his unit, started to pack and leave. He told his sergeant there were still guys out in the woods. His sergeant said that he was the last one back, and they were waiting on him to leave. He told his buddies about it, and it turns out there was another unit that did exercises in the area way back in the day that the 3 Marines went missing. There have been other Marines that got lost in the same area that said the same experiences running into 3 guys that pointed them in the right direction. One trip with the family, when I was 10, every night I had a dream about a cave off one of the trails. Every night, the same dream. Nothing bad happened, just me walking to it. I asked my family, no one knows anything about it. Finally, I asked the park rangers. 12 years prior to that, they had a cave off the same trail I said it was, exactly off the same bend of the trail, same landmarks. They leveled as much as they could and filled it the rest of the way. It's how close to the camp, and bears were using it. They wanted to avoid issues. No literature about the cave, not any maps, never talked about it. People didn't try to dig up anything or get hurt looking for it. I'm not superstitious, but I do believe the mountain talked to me. I was given information about the area for whatever reason. I believe I'm connected to it, and always will be. I once had an overnight party in which one of my friends was acting really weird. Next day, turns out people have proof he was in a different place. That was like 7, 8 years ago. Life just went on. The world kept spinning. Nothing else happened. When I was younger, my mom would drop me off at my grandparents' house while she worked the graveyard shift. Each time I would wake up in the middle of the night, it felt like my legs were being dropped, like my legs were levitating, and when I woke up, my legs were just bouncing from being dropped on a bed. I just ignored it thinking it was my imagination. Fast forward, adult, now talking to my older brother about scary stuff and stories, and I bring up the levitating legs in the middle of the night. The look he gave me. He knew exactly what I was talking about. It goes on and tells me the exact same thing was happening to him when he was staying over at my grandparents' parents. He thought he was just dreaming it. I was living in an 18th century house by myself in a rural part of New York. The house was on the corner of a narrow 2-lane road. I was laying in bed and I heard some squealing tires and then a large crash. Ran down the stairs to the kitchen to look out the window. I saw 2 cars badly wrecked. I went to the wall phone, this was before cell phones, and called 911. The lady asked me if anyone was hurt. I said, I don't know, but it looked really bad and they should hurry. I hung up, went back to the window, and saw a man from one car trying to open the driver's side door of the other car, and wouldn't budge. The car was rocking back and forth as he tried to open it. I thought to myself, you're not supposed to move anyone when they're injured. So I decided to go to the side door, down the driveway, which had high bushes on either side, to tell the people that help was on the way. It took maybe 8 seconds to get down the road. There was nothing there. No cars, no wreck, no skid marks, nothing. I was gobsmacked. I hid in the bushes as one after another came the fire truck, the police car, the ambulance, and slowly looked around and left. I had no idea what just happened. I'm a true skeptic. Just because I don't have an explanation doesn't mean it's paranormal. People in those parts, their town goes back to the 1600s. They think everything is haunted. A friend of mine believed it was. I don't remember what she called it. An echo, a ripple in time, of an actual accident that did happen in the same spot, another time. While at sea, in the middle of nowhere at night, something that appeared to be large, translucent, glowing butterfly showed up and was flying next to the ship. We were going fast and it was keeping up, while flying up and down at different heights. It almost looked like a fairy from Zelda, but without the light ball part. A friend of mine was outside with me, and we saw it at the same time, so I know it wasn't my imagination. Everyone laughed at us when we told them what we saw. To this day, I have no idea what it could have been. I was on a very small tropical island. The island had to be a couple miles off the beach and the rest was cliffs, with the whole island being basically a big hill. I was docked at the only dock on the island. I was working on a project tracking nesting sea turtles, which meant that overnight I patrolled the length of the beach on a set schedule with a few other volunteers. It's the kind of place where only way there's a small boat and absolutely no one lives there. The project had me there all night, and I boated back to the mainland and slept all day. One night there was a light up on the hill that was moving across from the hill, kind of like a runner with a headlamp, except there was no place for a runner to run. Vegetation was way too dense and was moving way too fast to be a person with a machete. To this day, I don't know what it was. My best guess is someone with a big laser was for some reason pointing at the island, but the mainland was a mile away at the closest point. So why would anybody do that? I have no idea. Could have been a boat doing it from closer, but no one was anchored at the island that night with a view of the forest where the light and I had been jogging all along. These days, I'd assume a drone, but it was more than 10 years ago. Absolutely no reason. I wouldn't see the pilot was anchored at the back of the island in a reef, maybe out of sight, so it's unlikely a laser. I was sitting in my basement on the couch. On the right corner of my basement, we have a built-in bar. The bar has a few shelves and a mirror that lets you see the staircase going back upstairs. And from behind the couch I was sitting on, there's a wall, and behind that wall is a staircase. I was sitting on the end of the couch, furthest from the staircase and furthest from the bar. I was sitting on my phone and I looked up to take a break, and the first thing my eyes focused on was that mirror. In the reflection of that mirror, I shit you not, I saw a completely pitch black, human-like figure turn the corner, slowly walk up the staircase. I nearly crapped my pants. Keep in mind, I was also alone down there with no contact with anyone besides calling or Facebook. Nobody could convince me to go back upstairs or get up from my spot on the couch for nearly a full day. Now I know that the person or thing or whatever was made all the way upstairs. I also know it never made it to the ground floor because the door at the top of the staircase is extremely creaky and loud. I know for a fact they never came back down because you can bet your sweet ass I watched that mirror like a hawk for the rest of the time I was down there. I've never experienced anything remotely paranormal in my house besides this. I'm very young, so I don't know I was seeing things or losing my mind. I just know that I saw something. And that something never left my house. For the longest time, my ceiling fan light didn't work, and I had other sources of light on the room and was too lazy to remove the bulb cover to try to fix it, so I left it alone. I was talking to my fiance, who lived in another state at the time, on the phone one night, and the lights in the room started dimming and glowing. The ceiling fan light came on and was super bright. The bulb for my bedside table lamp glowed real bright, and it busted. I don't think anything of it and brushed it off with maybe a power surge. I was happy the ceiling fan light wasn't completely broken. A few weeks later, my fiance moved down to my house from New York, so I finally made the decision to change the light bulbs of the ceiling fan lights. When I removed the ceiling fan bulb cover, I was dumbfounded when I saw there weren't any actual bulbs in any of the sockets. Had an experience that I can't explain. We were on a Boy Scout trip in northern Wisconsin. Our scoutmaster took us to an obscure roadside park that was known for having little earthen circles built up from where it was a native village. As soon as we stopped the van, our scoutmaster's dog bolted from the car and went straight into the woods. This was an extremely old and well-trained hunting dog, and it was totally out of character for him to run off. We could hear him howling and howling off in the woods. We ran after him and found him pacing in circles around a clearing about a quarter-mile back through some of the densest woods I've ever walked. In the middle of the clearing was a small headstone from the 1890s that belonged to a 4-year-old boy. We began to look around and noticed that in the clearing, the woods were totally calm despite it being a breezy day. There were also no bird noises. The dog kept pulling wildly towards the headstone in the middle of the clearing. Suddenly, it was like things snapped back to normal. The dog stopped pulling, the birds started chirping, and the breeze kicked back up. My mom told me when I was a toddler, I always asked about my wife. When I should be home, I'd talk about work and how I'd get back to my car. Sometimes she'd play along and ask me why my car was so important, and I'd explain I'd just been in a really bad accident, explain graphic details as a toddler shouldn't know. To this day, I have graphic dreams of being in a car. It always plays out the same. I'm in an old car, and I'm driving on some sort of bridge. I fix my mirror, stare into my eyes for a moment before loud honking, swerving. Then I wake up choking and unable to breathe until I manage to use my inhaler. I still have these dreams, and it's always the same. It's weird. It might be a result of me overthinking what my mom told me, but it still creeps me out. When my son was 3, he told my wife and I we had a ghost in the house we just had bought. We asked more about it. My son went on to describe a little old man named George. He assured to us George was nice. The next day, the elderly neighbor came over and saw some renovating we had done and said, "George would love that you've done to the house. He lived here for 50 years until his death." My wife and I got the chills. We lived here happily with George for over 20 years now. My uncle was an alcoholic. When I visited my grandmother one year, he completely got crap-faced and told me he was going to die. And then when he did, he would play his flute for me, despite never have played an instrument in his life. A couple years later, I had gone on a date and was driving home when I heard this weird whistling sound in my car, like someone who was trying to play a flute who had never done so in their lives. It was so out of place that I said, "Hello?" almost jokingly, expecting to have someone respond. When I got home, my dad told me my uncle had died. Over the next 2 nights, Both of my parents swear they heard his voice calling out to them when they got up to use the bathroom. I visited the grave a year later. I heard some whistling flute sound. It's out loud. Seriously? Why can't you just say hi like a normal person? I then heard a crow that sounded like it was laughing. Could have been a bunch of coincidences, but it would be nice to consider my crazy uncle was being crazy even in his death as a ghost. Another weird thing was the night of the anniversary of my grandmother's death, a jar of coins fell over in the night, and a significant number of pennies, like a dozen or two, landed on their side and perfectly balanced until we discovered them the next morning. Now that was weird. My youngest brother Corey passed away a few years ago. After the funeral, a reception was held in the basement of a local church. There was a small stage area at one end with the backdrop and curtains on the side. I was talking to my family and friends at the tables when my wife points out that our 3-year-old son is running around on the stage, and maybe he shouldn't be in case he falls off. He's running back and forth in a way that looks like he's being chased, dodging back and forth, speeding up, abrupt turns, laughing like a loon, hiding behind the curtains, and taking off again. I go over and ask him innocently, "What you doing, little man?" And he replies, "Chasing with Uncle Corey." Effing chills, man. My brother suddenly started calling himself by another name when he was little. He said he came from the jungle. Sometimes he had dreams about monsters raising from the ground, and he would yell for Pete. And he would wake up saying he couldn't save Pete from the monsters. We visited the Vietnam Wall Memorial. He took off running down the wall and stopped and stood there with his hand on the wall for a while, and he said, "I'm sorry, Pete." And he never had to dream again, and never used the other name again. He has forgotten all about it like it never happened. One morning, my wife told me about a creepy floating head she saw at night while laying in bed. However, she never actually described what he looked like. So when I had the same experience 2 weeks later, I was excited to share it with her. We went back and forth describing ghosts, sharing as much detail as we could. Finally, wife shared that her ghost had a beard, and relieved I said that mine had no facial hair at all. However, her face went pale as she confessed to testing my story. Her floating head, in fact, had no facial hair either. Our descriptions matched 100%. My wife and I never really believed in ghosts until we both saw the same one. I work in a prison, and one night a prisoner buzzes me up in master control just sobbing. He said someone was standing outside his cell door. It wasn't time for head count, and all the doors were showing secure, so we went staff down to search. Nobody was out. It was watching all on the cameras and operating the doors. The whole time the prisoner wouldn't stop buzzing up, begging us to help him. They reassured him, and it was weird as we usually know the crazy ones. Like a lot have legit psychosis and hallucinations, but not this guy. He was sobbing. Then when the staff left, and I got a green state on my unit, every alarm went into hyperdrive, motion detectors, defense alarm, everything in and near that one unit. So back in they go, did a full head count, and the prisoner was so frightened he had to be taken to constant OBS, the safety unit, because of the man running around and staring into his cell. In the house I lived as a young child, I would hear people walking around in conversations. I could never make out what was being said, and I could tell out of the 4 different voices one was deeper and more controlling. I guess would be a way to put it. I was left at home alone a lot as my parents worked full-time. When I was in my teens, we moved to a new state, and in a new home, it was more of the same. I could hear conversations in the upstairs rooms that no one was in. That progressed to the sounds of footsteps. As the years went on, got heavier and more stomping than walking. Doors would open and slam on their own. I'd wake up to some sensation of someone blowing in my ear or face. I moved out when I was 16. At 17, I came back to my loft-type apartment with my roommate. It was just him and I. From the bedroom area just above us, it sounded like someone jumped off his bed with heavy feet, ran from his room, slammed the door shut, into my room, slammed the door shut, faded into nothing. He moved out 2 weeks later. I was in bed and woke up to my brother in my doorway screaming. I immediately ran to him, but he ran away. When I caught him, I asked why he was screaming. He said he saw another me hovering over myself, laughing, and was terrified for me for a while. Now he doesn't remember, but my parents do. Alligators. A young woman in town married a man from another part of the country. He was a nice fellow, and they got along pretty well together. There was only one problem. Every night he'd go swimming in the river. Sometimes he'd be gone all night long, and she'd complain about how lonely she was. This couple had 2 sons. As soon as the boys could walk, their father began to teach them how to swim. And when they got to be old enough, he took them swimming in the river at night. Often they would stay there all night long. The young woman would stay home all by herself. After a while, she began to act in a strange way. At least that's what the neighbors said. She told them that her husband was turning into an alligator and that he was trying to turn the boys into alligators. Everybody told her there was nothing wrong with a man taking his son swimming. That was a natural thing to do. And when it came to alligators, there just weren't any nearby. Everybody knew that. Early one morning, the young woman came running into town from the direction of the river. She was soaking wet. She said a big alligator and 2 little alligators had pulled her in and had tried to get her to eat a raw fish. They were her husband and her sons, she said. They wanted her to live with them, but she had gotten away. Her doctor decided she had lost her mind, and he had her put in a hospital for a while. After that, nobody saw her husband and boys again. They just disappeared. But now and then, a fisherman would tell us about seeing alligators in the river at night. Usually it was 1 big alligator and 2 small ones, but people said they were just making it up. Everybody knows there aren't any alligators around here. Hey, I'm Connor from Bigfoot Anon, and I'm always on the hunt for the next big adventure. When you're on the trail for long hours, you build up quite the stench, enough to drive any skunk ape or yeti away. Luckily, I'm on the quest now for the solution to all my problems. Yeti bars. They do exist. Available in tons of different scents and fragrances. Check out yetibars.net for more and use my code BA10 for a special offer. Clean like a beast. Yeti bars!